to the Conservative Cat Show. I so do appreciate you being here. This is the place where we refuse to cover up, the sacred cow, cover up for the sacred cows of global elites. Okay, we refuse to bow down to the sacred cows of the global elites. We scratch where it itches, right here on the Conservative Cat Show. And today's episode is very important. So you're going to want to subscribe right now. Hit the subscribe button. Share this out with your friends right now. Share it out with just one friend today. Because today's episode is very important. We've never done an episode about... I've talked about Bolsonaro before, but I've never really talked a lot about what has gone on in Brazil. Okay, because what's happened this week in Brazil is not just about Brazil. It is about the weaponization of the courts, the rise of socialism in the Western Hemisphere, and the global effort to silence Christians. Bolsonaro is a Christian conservative leader, and he refused to play by the left's rules. We saw Charlie Kirk last week, the assassination simply for being a Christian. Really, that's what it is, a Christian conservative. Charlie, I was thinking about it, early this morning. He was one of those guys who didn't just talk behind a microphone. I just talked behind a microphone. There were a couple of years there where I would go out into the community, do some public comments, but I stepped away from that lifestyle because it earns you some enemies, right? And Charlie wasn't afraid. I hate to admit it, I am a little afraid of the left. But I wake up, I do it every single morning. I've been doing it since 2021 now, for 4 years, 2021 since I graduated college. And something that, I've been thinking about Charlie, he went out there and he took people from a level 1 or from a level 0 to a level 1. There's some conservative pundits out there, even on this show, Conservative Cat. What we do here, I talk to the Christians, right? I pull out scripture. This is, a show where typically you've been a Christian for a while. I cite scripture. I connect that scripture back to news stories, to Illinois politics, and I try to point out where scripture can help us navigate current events and politics and laws and bills and what we should think about it as Christians, the political space, specifically here in the state of Illinois. That's what this show is all about. But it's not for your typical, level 0. I'm not a Christian. I am an atheist, or I'm agnostic. He was going into the darkest places of the world, college campuses. And I say that from experience. Just 5 months ago in April, I was actually at ISU's campus when Charlie was there, and I was interviewing some folks. I went up to the communications tent trying to secure an interview with one of the spokespeople there at TPUSA, but they weren't taking any press interviews that day, which I found odd because all the other TPUSA events I've been to, usually there's someone there. They designate someone to take press interviews, but after speaking with some of the TPUSA staff there, they had said that, Charlie was allegedly denied extra amplification devices that he uses when going to college campuses. And they just had like the 2 speakers up front. There were thousands upon thousands of people there. The denial of amplification devices really caused some security concerns for me. Even I was up there with the TPUSA staff, and I was like, nah, I'm getting out from the front of this crowd, and I'm getting to the back. I didn't feel safe going up there to the tent because everybody was very crowded. They wanted to hear Charlie speak, and the only way they could hear him speak is by getting very close. So there was a big security hole there at ISU's campus, not to mention the Bones Student Center, which was behind Charlie's tent. There's tons of windows, top floor windows. It's a very tall building, and they had windows there. And there was a student there who, I'm assuming some individual in the window who was behind Charlie, who held up a sign that said Nazi. And, there was a Nazi symbol on the sign. And I thought to myself, well, somebody ought to get him out of the window, and a professor, faculty, somebody ought to get him out of the window. And to be honest with you, they should have closed down the top floors of the Bone Student Center so that way students couldn't access the windows directly behind Charlie. Another security thing that I noticed when I was there 5 months ago, professors, and something I noticed about the Charlie Kirk event was a lot of moderate people. Like, I would say I'm pretty far right with my beliefs, my convictions, pretty far right, very conservative, hard Republican, you might say. But everybody there was very moderate, and they just wanted to hear Charlie speak and debate others, and they wanted to debate each other in the line and to talk to each other in the crowd. It was a very moderate crowd. Everybody was very civil and excited to hear Charlie speak, Republican, Democrats alike. Everybody wanted to be there, except people on the far left, fringe group in the back. And I interviewed some of those folks in the back, and they just said a lot of nonsensical things. And Reddit is a very dangerous place. I am of the belief that we should ban that app completely. That's where leftists go to coordinate. They come up with really radical ideas there on that platform. And it's not nearly, I don't think that it's monitored enough, Reddit. So anyway, they came up with like this Reddit slogan that was just completely nonsensical, and they were screaming into megaphones. They were menacing people in the crowd. And instead of professors and faculty shutting that part of the protest or part of that event down and breaking that disruption up, the security team, the small security team that there was, I mean, I think I saw 2 security officers or something my whole time there. And then the rest of it was Charlie Kirk's security up there by the front by him. You would think that the professors would have broken that up. Nope. The only professors that I got to talk to were actually, I mean, a good handful of them were participating in the fringy counter protest that was in the back. They were shouting nonsensical things. And, you know, I bring this up this morning because it is the darkest places. Some of the darkest places in our nation are our college campuses. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the security. There were some definitely some security flaws. At the end of the day, you guys know that my belief is that evil ultimately took Charlie's life. Yes, there was an assassin. Yes, they caught that assassin. But ultimately it's we're dealing not with flesh and blood, but the principalities and with the evil spirits of this world. And I think that's ultimately what took Charlie's life, is that there's this spiritual warfare going on, and any little bit of light that there is that Charlie brought to these college campuses, it had to be snuffed out, you know. And I think that's ultimately what took Charlie's life. But we can't not talk about the security issues and how these universities, I believe, deliberately made it to where it was difficult for Charlie to perform these debates or to go to these college campuses to speak to the students. They deliberately denied him, allegedly. I mean, I didn't confirm this with the university, but TPUSA staff said, you know, hey, they denied us amplification, so we aren't doing any pressers. There's just too many people up here close to Charlie. We need to have all TPUSA staff and security, you know, alert. We can't be participating with members of the crowd. Usually, and I've been to TPUSA events, they'll have the amplification devices in the back for the people who aren't debating. They'll have the line, and then those rails that keep the crowd away from the tent are typically much further away. But these rails were closer, obviously, because they wouldn't be able to hear Charlie if they were, you know, 30 feet away. They were about like 5 feet away from Charlie, 10 feet away from Charlie. So I bring this up because there is an effort, not only by assassins to silence Christian conservative leaders, but there is an effort by what I would say those in the academic world, college campuses. And that brings me to today's story, because there were 2 professors who called for what happened in Brazil to have happened here in America, and said that what happened in Brazil should have happened here in America. And our professors in these academic hellholes, also I'll call them that, they are encouraging our students to silence Christian conservatives. I'll give you one example. When I was in school, I graduated in 2021. I'm a ISU alum. And when I was in school, I actually have the receipts. Professor had called for, or had encouraged me to call for Trump's death. Okay, and that he was a traitor. He said the essay prompt was to talk about how January 6th was treasonous, that people should be charged with treason, and to talk about treason and sedition. And I wrote the essay. He loved it, right? It was kind of a leftist essay, won't lie to you. I mean, I wrote very, very lefty. I worked for NPR. I felt like I had to in order to succeed in college. Although in 2016, there's photos of me out there in high school where I was a big Trump supporter. Definitely grew up with Christian conservative values. But when I got to college, I abandoned all of that. And I felt like I had to in order to obtain good grades and scholarships. And I did. It worked. The one time I wrote favorably about President Donald Trump, or in support of President Donald Trump's, it wasn't even his policies that I was in support of. It was his campaign speech. I said that it was an effective campaign speech. And for that, I got a F and almost failed the class. I got a C in the class. I'd never gotten a C before in my life in a class until that point. But I had a professor encourage me to call Trump a traitor, and then to take it further and call for his execution as a traitor. And those were his notes in my essay, in red ink. Okay. So when I say these places are very, very dark, and that they actually encourage students to silence Christian conservative voices, I'm not playing around. That's what's happening on our college campuses. So let's get to this story about Jair Bolsonaro. So he is the former Brazilian president, and he's a guy who won his presidency with the support of millions of everyday Brazilians who are just tired of corruption and socialism. And this guy Bolsonaro, he was sentenced to 27 years and 3 months in prison. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, God, he must have murdered someone. Was it theft? Was he embezzling billions like his successor, Lula? And I'll get to Lula here in a second. But no, he was sentenced to 27 years and 3 months for plotting a coup after he lost the 2022 election. Now, friends, let's pause. You don't have to be a lawyer or a historian or even a cat like me to smell something rotten here. 27 years for a coup, plotting a coup. There's something fishy going on here, and I smell it. He was convicted, of course, Bolsonaro, in a kangaroo court, where this judge was also presiding as the prosecutor, the investigator, and finally the juror. Okay. So Alexander de Moraes is his name. This was the judge who ultimately sentenced. I mean, there was a panel of 5 judges, but it was 4-1. But this guy was the prosecutor and the judge. He is like a Stalin in training, this guy, Alexander. And he's a Stalin in training of Brazil's judiciary. Very Stalin-esque type guy. He's in the judiciary there. He led the charge, argued the case, and then raised his hand to convict. So if you were tried in small town traffic court in Illinois, the case would probably get thrown out on appeal. Any case here in America would get thrown out on appeal if the judge had also acted as the prosecutor. But in Brazil, apparently this gets you a headline in the New York Times praising you as a defender of democracy. So the New York Times actually printed this up, and they're calling Alexander and Lula, they're defenders of democracy. And they said that we should have done the same thing here in the United States when it came to President Donald Trump in 2020. So from the moment Bolsonaro stepped into office in 2019, the knives came out. The left, the courts, And the media could not stand the idea of a pro-family, pro-freedom, pro-sovereignty leader in charge of South America's largest nation, Brazil. They accused him of spreading fake news, of attacking democracy, and they said this because he questioned really the electronic voting machines, okay, back when he lost in 2022. So, but even during COVID, they accused him of fake news, spreading misinformation because of the vaccinations. I know this all sounds familiar, and it should, because all of this happened to Trump in 2020. Okay, so fortunately, election denial is not a crime here in the United States. If it were, all of these people would be tossed into jail for 27 years. Take a listen to this.
How can you win with Russian interference?
That's what I'm
scared about in 2020.
But rightly.
Because I think he's an illegitimate president that didn't really win. So how do you fight against that in 2020?
You are absolutely right.
He's an illegitimate president in my mind.
Would you be my vice presidential candidate? Folks, look, I absolutely agree.
Trump didn't actually win the election in 2016. He lost the election, and he was put into office because the Russians interfered.
Russia interfered with our election, attacked our democracy for the sole purpose of artificially placing someone at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. They were successful.
Trump knows he's an illegitimate president.
The president or elect, although legally elected, is not legitimate.
I don't see this president-elect as a legitimate president.
You said you believe that Russia's interference altered the outcome of the election.
I do. We have a president who, if in fact it is proven, has been assisted by the Russians and may in fact not be a legitimate president.
The one thing that Trump is fearful of when it comes to his being president is that finally we will see how illegitimate his victory actually was.
Okay, so I think you guys get the gist. This goes on for 24 minutes. Democrats denying the election. The left, of course, doesn't defend democracy. They defend its own power. That's what they were defending there. They weren't defending democracy. And when an outsider like Bolsonaro in Brazil threatens that power, they call it disinformation, illegitimate, and when you speak truth about corruption, which Bolsonaro did, they call it attacking the institutions. That's what the left would call it. And when you defend your people against global socialism, which Bolsonaro was doing, they will call you a fascist. Okay, if you defend your people against vicious socialism, global socialism. Bolsonaro stood in the way of globalists who want to turn and have turned Brazil into a playground for China, a testing ground for green energy scams, and a base of operations for socialism in Latin America. And because he stood tall, they had to destroy him, much like Charlie Kirk. Bolsonaro, they had to destroy him. They sentenced this Christian conservative guy to 27 years in prison because he stood tall. I want to play this clip. This is from 3 years ago. Tucker Carlson actually talked about Bolsonaro and the attack. So Lula da Silva is the successor here. He's the guy who's the president now. I do want to talk about Tucker Carlson a few years ago, bringing up this parallel, really, between the United States and Brazil and what has gone on there. This could have been Donald Trump, Bolsonaro, sentenced to 27 years in prison. Take a listen to what Tucker Carlson had to say about all of this back in just a few years ago. Here we go.
See for ourselves what the Chinese are doing to Latin America. We're making a documentary about it for our Tucker Carlson original series. Brazil has the last pro-American government in Latin America. It's our single most important ally in the Western Hemisphere. Allowing Brazil to become a colony of China would be a significant blow to us and potentially a very serious military threat. The Biden administration appears to be in favor of it. One person who's emphatically not in favor of it is the president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro. So, of course, the American media hate him. Here's some of their slander.
The United States isn't the only country lurching dangerously towards authoritarianism. It is happening all over, indeed. Just yesterday, for example, Brazilians elected Jair Bolsonaro.
Usually you don't get rid of an aspiring dictator through the electoral process. Brazil is going to have trouble with Bolsonaro.
It's that same authoritarian, like women-hating, racist energy. He's the Trump of Brazil.
President Bolsonaro doesn't believe in social distancing, doesn't want lockdowns, much more extreme than President Trump.
Brazil's far-right nationalist president Jair Bolsonaro spoke at an event in Dallas. These two men and fellow travelers like Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin represent the growing global threat to the ideas of liberalism.
These are people whose research consists of 3 minutes on Wikipedia on the way to the studio. He's a racist. Of course he is. He, quote, doesn't want lockdowns. There's your proof. But it is the last clip from plagiarist Fareed Zakaria that explains why they're so mad at Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro, Fareed Zakaria tells us, represents a, quote, growing global threat to the ideas of liberalism. Liberalism, meaning neoliberalism, meaning globalism. And in fact, that is true. Bolsonaro is no Justin Trudeau. He's not a low IQ fascist who would be working as an Instagram influencer if he doesn't have his own army. He's not the president of Ukraine, who shuts down television stations that dare to criticize him and outlaws opposition parties and arms Nazis. In conventional terms, Bolsonaro is in fact liberal. He has done nothing to stop civil liberties in Brazil. But at the same time, he is a nationalist. He cares about his country. He resists China. Therefore, he must be stopped. George Soros hates him, and so does Joe Biden. He's not.
Okay, that was a few years ago. Tucker Carlson talking about Bolsonaro today. Just in 27 years, that's what he has to face. Bolsonaro. Now, I want to talk about the guy sitting in the presidential palace today, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. This guy is a socialist, okay? The media calls him a man of the people. Socialist, more like communist, okay? They call him a working class hero. They call him a man of the people, a champion of the poor. But let's be honest, Lula is a grifter socialist who has a criminal record, by the way. Not a lot of people know this. This guy was actually convicted of corruption, money laundering, and he spent time in prison only to be enter back into politics because Brazil's courts, the same courts who are throwing Bolsonaro in prison, by the way, for 27 years, overturned his conviction on a technicality. So Lula is a poster child, is the poster child for everything wrong with socialism. He talks about helping the poor, but yet his policies enrich the elite. They weaken the middle class, and they empower government cronies. So he hugs communist China, cozies up to the CCP for trade deals, and hands over Brazil's resources. I mean, Brazil is essentially an arm of the CCP at this point. So he sings the praises of the environmental radicals while ordinary Brazilians are struggling to put food on the table. And let's not miss the spiritual reality here. The spiritual reality is that socialism always promises paradise, but delivers chains. Okay, it is anti-family, it is anti-freedom. Socialism is anti-God, and Lula is no exception. And Bolsonaro is very outspoken about his Christian faith. Back in 2019, and I want to get to Bolsonaro's persecution. Back in 2019, the courts launched what was so-called a fake news inquiry. Okay, so back in 2019, they were going after Bolsonaro. This has been years in the making. Imagine that, the judiciary investigating a sitting president for social media posts. Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? Similar. They accused him of undermining democracy because he dared question them. They expanded the definition of fake news to include vaccine skepticism, criticism of judges, and even complaints about the electronic voting machines. So all of this was Bolsonaro's concerns. He had concerns about the vaccines. He had concerns about judges who overturned, by the way, the convictions of his successor, Lula. And he complained about the electronic voting systems. If you thought the Facebook fact checkers were bad, okay, in America, and they banned you from Facebook for a couple of days, fact checking in Brazil comes with handcuffs. Okay, so he essentially went to jail for 27 years because he spread fake news. Okay. So come January 8th, and this is kind of shocking stuff, it gets even very, very, very eerily close to what's gone on in America. January 8th, 2023, thousands of Bolsonaro supporters stormed Brazil's Supreme Court, Congress, and presidential palace, protesting that they believed that the election was stolen. Sounds very familiar again, doesn't it? The left immediately declared this an insurrection. I will show you some footage of the storming. I mean, thousands upon thousands of supporters of Brazil's former president Bolsonaro were there.
Gente, milhares e milhares de pessoas. Pessoal, nós vencemos, o bem vence o mal.
Como verdadeiros vândalos, destruindo o que encontrava pela frente. Nós achamos que houve falta de segurança e eu queria dizer para vocês que todas essas pessoas que fizeram isso serão encontradas e serão punidas.
Will be found and will be punished. That was Lula, the successor of Bolsonaro. And of course, they stormed buildings. And Bolsonaro, I want to be very clear, never told his supporters to storm the building, just like Donald Trump never told the J6ers to storm the Capitol. Okay, he never incited violence. The courts and the media needed their January 6th moment to brand him as a dictator. Okay, so this was their January 6th moment, and the moment is exactly what they got. They got the moment, and they pounced, and they banned, at this point, when this happened in 2023, they banned Bolsonaro from politics for 8 years. Then subsequently raided his home, accused him of jewelry smuggling, and dragged his family, his wife even, into investigations. This isn't justice. This is political theater. And why should you care? You're probably wondering this morning, Kat, why the hell do I care about some Brazilian president? Okay, some former Brazilian president who didn't win his election against Lula. Why should I care? Because the New York Times and Democrat senators like Ed Markey are literally saying that we need to learn from Brazil, and they are praising these Brazilian judges for crushing Bolsonaro, sentencing him to 27 years. And these professors who are quoted in this article, like I said, I was going to bring this full circle, academia, the academic minds of American institutions and colleges, they are the most dangerous people in this nation. They are asking right now, publicly in the New York Times, and this was just published, why didn't we do this to Donald Trump? They are calling for us to have done this to Donald Trump. Democrat senators like Ed Markey are calling for us to do what Brazil did to Bolsonaro to Donald Trump. So think about that. Leftist academics, politicians, they are openly admitting that they want the American courts to act more like the Brazilian courts. Okay, Bolsonaro, I don't even really know exactly what his crime was. I can't even really pinpoint it. I think it was because he was spreading fake news, spreading misinformation because he was skeptical of the vaccines and the voting machines. I think it was because they said that he called for his supporters to storm the Supreme Court there in Brazil. I don't even really know exactly what they sentenced him to 27 years for. He didn't murder anybody. Okay. So they want our judges to become political enforcers. That is what they are calling for in this New York Times piece. They want speech to be regulated. They want elections to be certified without any kind of question. And they want conservatives to be completely barred from our office. Friends, if Brazil is the model, then freedom is the casualty. We should not be modeling ourselves after Brazil. And it's very eerily close to what happened here in America. So let me show you this tweet from Ed Markey. He's a Democrat senator, a U.S. senator. This is wild stuff here, folks. So he says Brazil is sending its election denier to prison for 27 years. Thank God we don't have, unfortunately, we don't have prison sentences for election deniers. I just shared with you a 24-minute clip of Democrats denying elections, by the way. We sent ours to the White House, right? Brazil has already lived under military dictatorship, or dictatorship and saw that threat clearly. We failed to protect our democracy. We need to learn from Brazil before it's too late. So then he cites this New York Times piece. It's an opinion guest essay where a couple of professors go and they talk about, how we should have done this to President Donald Trump. I want to share this tweet with you. Look at this. You know you hate America. Just admit it. You want to destroy America. Look at the American flag here. He poses for a picture. The American flag is on the ground in the background. This is Ed Markey. This guy's a disgrace. So, yeah, I wanted to share that with you. A complete disgrace. Here's what one tweet says. A disgrace that sitting U.S. Senator would pose for a photo while having a U.S. flag prominently laying on the floor in the background. There was a time in America when this would be an insult and would be the end of your political career. Sad, completely disgraceful. Yeah, a complete disgrace, that guy. So I want to bring this through a Christian worldview lens. I want to bring this to scripture. Check this out. Proverbs 17:15 says, "He who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the righteous are both alike an abomination to the Lord." What we see in Brazil is exactly, and what we've seen in the United States is exactly that. The guilty, who should be, Lula and his socialist cronies, they're exalted. And the righteous, the Christian, Bolsonaro and his supporters are condemned. But God's justice is not mocked. Remember this, folks. Tyrants fall, corruption collapses. From Pharaoh to Nebuchadnezzar to every socialist strongman in history, the pattern repeats. Tyranny will fall. Christians are called to stand firm. This is exactly what Bolsonaro has done, and he's being persecuted for it. He's been thrown in jail for 27 years. We saw Kirk assassinated. We're seeing Bolsonaro locked into prison for 20 plus years, almost 30 years. Christians, we are called to stand firm. We are called to speak the truth, and we are called to pray without ceasing. So this justice guy, Alexander Moraes, I can't believe it. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Justice Alexander de Moraes. Today I investigate Bolsonaro. Tomorrow I prosecute him. And then I will arrest or sentence Bolsonaro. Next month, I'll probably arrest Bolsonaro for making eye contact with me. All he did was skeptical of the vaccines. All he did was skeptical of the election process, the voting machines. That's all he did was express skepticism. And that's kind of how democracy works, folks. But the left, if you look at them the wrong way, for example, this guy, Alexander de Moraes, I would imagine if Bolsonaro looks at him the wrong way, he'll arrest him for making eye contact with him. You can't ask questions. You can't doubt the election machines. You can't be skeptical of forced vaccinations. They want you to trust them because they think that they are the law. And for background, this Alexander de Moraes guy, he actually got in trouble and sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury Department. He got his own executive order from President Donald Trump. The executive order is titled "Addressing Threats to the United States by the Government of Brazil." And he was, bullying and threatening U.S. social media platforms, and that actually got him sanctioned by President Donald Trump's U.S. Treasury Department. So he's got his own executive order out there, and here's where we land today. I want to land on our four legs. Okay, cat always lands on their feet. Bolsonaro is not in prison because he's guilty of anything. Bolsonaro is in prison because he's dangerous. He's dangerous to the globalist socialist project. He's dangerous to the principalities of this world, the evil forces of this world. Lula sits in power not because he's a righteous guy, but because he's useful to China, useful to the elites, and useful to the global left. God is not mocked. Tyranny never lasts forever. And the task for us in America and really around the world is to defend the truth, speak boldly, and never surrender liberty ever. Never surrender our liberty ever. Pray for Bolsonaro. Pray for the Brazilian people. Pray for America. Pray that we never follow Brazil's path here. We never go down this road of judicial tyranny. We don't have anything quite like that but it very well could have happened to President Donald Trump. And now we have U.S. Democrat senators and professors, these academic institutions calling for this kind of stuff to happen to our duly elected presidents. So as long as the conservative cat show is here, and as long as I've got this microphone, we are going to call it out. I've got to take a quick break. Smash that like button, share this out with your friends. One more rightist killed. Charlie Kirk recently by a socialist for having a different opinion. Also, a Ukrainian woman killed by a socialist just sitting too close to him. For sitting too close to him. Yep. If you missed Friday's show, I definitely recommend you go check it out. Friday's show, I sat down with the pastor and he discussed, hey, we can look at this assassin. A lot of people are going to try to, say, oh, he's somebody on the right. You've been hearing that from the left where this assassin, Charlie Kirk's assassin, is somebody on the right. That's not true. There is credible evidence that supports this theory out there right now that he actually lived with a transgender boyfriend of his. His family was all Mormon, from what I understand. And they were kind of conservative. Most of the family was conservative. Most of the family voted for Donald Trump. He went off to college and became a different person, which is the tale for many, many people. You become a totally different person. And I will say this, college did make me a totally different person. I grew up with Christian conservative values. I went into college and felt like I had to be a leftist in order to get good grades and scholarships. I worked for NPR, which was wild to think about. And really it pushed me so far into the other direction. Okay, that I became a conservative radio talk show host. I had the Washington Post write hit pieces about me, about how I was an insurrectionist and, how I wasn't defending democracy or whatever the hell, or that I was attacking democracy. And I went so far into another direction where I started speaking out at school board meetings and writing up hit pieces, and not really hit pieces, just writing up the truth about our local government. They pushed me so far to where I became a very outspoken person on the right. College changes you because they are dens, divisive dens, and they're very dark places. And I would say most college students actually get pushed into the different direction than I did. I got pushed into the direction of being more far right, being and doubling down on my original belief system. But for this assassin, I think that he grew up with a certain belief system, but college warped his brain. And, we mourn the assassination of our TPUSA leader, of conservative leader Charlie Kirk. I do want to take a break. We are going to be talking about how JD Vance is going to be taking over his hosting duties for today's show, the Charlie Kirk show. There's been a gaping hole left by this loss here. And JD Vance, he's going to be hosting the Charlie Kirk show today. So I'm going to be right back. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Smash that like button, share this out with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button.
Real strength doesn't need applause, and real faith doesn't flex for attention. Jesus said, when you fast, don't walk around looking miserable. Try to look holy. That's not devotion. That's performance. And God doesn't reward actors. Matthew 6, verses 16 through 18. Is Jesus calling men to fast in secret, where only the Father sees? Because fasting isn't about proving your discipline. It's about pursuing God with hunger so real, you trade food for fire. You don't fast to earn points. You don't fast to make space. You weaken the flesh so the spirit gets louder. You say no to your cravings so you can say yes to something deeper. But here's the catch. It's got to be real. Not for your boys, not for social media, just you and God. In the quiet, in the dark. That's where rewards are born. In silence, in secret, in the furnace of unseen obedience. You want to be strong in public? Train in private. Fast without a stage. Pray without applause. Obey without a crowd. Your Father sees in secret, and He's the only one who reward what matters. Patriot Pump doesn't give you just energy. It keeps you focused. No fluff, no crash, just clean, hard-driving fuel for men who train with purpose and sacrifice. If you're building discipline in the dark, this is your edge. Train hard, stay sharp.
Hey, go ahead and smash that like button, share this out with your friends. I so do appreciate you being here this morning. I want to talk about VP JD Vance. So JD Vance is going to be taking over hosting duties today for the Charlie Kirk Show, from what I understand. There has been a gaping, just a big hole left by Charlie's loss. And this is what VP Vance wrote. He said, "Please join me as I pay tribute to my friend." He also eulogized his friend in a long, very long, moving post on social media after the senseless killing. And I do want to share that a little bit with you. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is JD Vance's eulogy, really, of Charlie Kirk, of his friend. And here's how it starts out. A while ago, probably 2017, I appeared on Tucker Carlson's Fox show to talk about God knows what. Afterwards, a name I barely knew sent me a DM on Twitter and told me I did a great job. It was Charlie Kirk. And that moment of kindness began a friendship that lasted until today. Charlie was fascinated by ideas and always willing to learn and change his mind. Like me, he was skeptical of President Donald Trump in 2016. Like me, he came to see President Donald Trump as a figure capable of moving American politics away from globalism that has dominated our entire lives. When others were right, he learned from them. When he was right, he usually was. He was generous. With Charlie, the attitude was never, "I told you so," but "welcome." And it goes on. He wraps it up by saying, "I was meeting in the West Wing with those, when those group chats started lighting up with people telling Charlie they were praying for him." So there was group chats that JD Vance was in, and those group chats were lighting up saying, "Hey, we're praying for you, Charlie, Charlie." That was how I learned my friend had been shot. The group chats lighting up. I prayed a lot over that next hour. As you know, first good news and then bad trickled in. So the good news was that he had been stabilized in the hospital. I'm not sure exactly what happened. I wasn't there, obviously, but he said, "I prayed a lot over the next hour. There was some good news, and then there was bad news that trickled in. God didn't answer my prayers, and that's okay. He had other plans. And now Charlie is in heaven. I'll ask him to talk to the big man directly on behalf of his family, his friends, and the country he loved so dearly. You ran a good race, my friend. We've got it from here." So they became friends, even really before he was VP, by the way, before he was chosen as Trump's VP. Vance and Kirk were actually on the list to become VP. Okay, so Vance and Kirk, they were close friends for many, many years. Actually, Kirk got it to where he would be a senator, endorsed him. So they were friends long before he ever became VP. And he noted that Kirk was one of the first people who reached out when he had decided to run for U.S. Senate in 2021, and that Kirk had contacted him with others and connected him with others, and really helped shape his campaign. And he connected him even with Donald Trump Jr. in 2021, and that really helped him secure that Senate seat. He added that Kirk was one of his most dedicated advocates over the years, a Vance advocate, and even guided Trump's VP selection until they landed on Vance. So I think that Charlie might have been floated around as a VP nitpick, like a name, but they eventually landed on Vance. And I think that Kirk had something to do with that because of how close Vance and Kirk are. Maybe he guided the decision on landing on Vance to become the VP. Vigils have been happening across America. My church, they actually, my pastor, he talked about the 7 things we should take away from the life and death of Charlie Kirk. The Tabernacle, I'm wearing that shirt today. That church has a YouTube channel. You can go check out that sermon. I mean, the churches were packed yesterday. I have several people reaching out to me asking me, hey, Kat, what should my next step be in my faith journey? I'm thinking more about Christianity. If that's you, you can always email me, conservativecatbarker@gmail.com, conservativecatbarker@gmail.com. And I would be happy to tell you about Jesus, how he changed my life. But JD Vance and so many others, they are going to continue. I think his wife, Erica, Charlie Kirk's wife, Erica, they are going to continue with his vision, with his legacy, so that way his passion will not be in vain. He will be remembered. I do want to share this clip. Now, you might be wondering why the coffin is tilted at 30 degrees. I think that there were instructions for JD Vance and for the people here in this video. This is really hard to watch. I think there were instructions to keep the coffin at a 30-degree angle. He did lose a lot of blood, and they were trying to preserve the body. I believe that it was actually transported at a 30-degree angle. They put some wedges underneath the coffin in transport. But take a look here at this video. Truly, Charlie Kirk will be remembered. Take a look. Okay. Truly, it's so hard to watch that clip. It's been a hard week, and there's been a lot of discussion, and that brings me to this, Bill Maher. There's been a lot of discussion about dangerous rhetoric and security. I already talked about this in the beginning of the show, where security really needs to be looked at, and how these universities have deliberately, really, I've seen a lot of instances where these universities have deliberately made it impossible for conservatives to exist on campus. Charlie Kirk at ISU, there were a lot of security flaws, so much so that I was like, yeah, this is unsafe to be close to the tent of Charlie Kirk. There were people behind him in windows with signs that had Nazi symbols. And then, the security team wasn't breaking up disruptions. There was clearly a fringe group on the outside of the Charlie Kirk event, these counter protesters to the event. They weren't broken up. Professors were joining those protesters, the counter protesters, and faculty members. I talked with them. Very bizarre. You would think that professors and faculty would break up this sort of direct disruption. Thousands of people, here they are, excited. Leftists, conservatives, more moderate people, they were all waiting in anticipation to hear Charlie Kirk and to listen to Charlie Kirk. But there was this fringy group on the outside, and they were menacing people with megaphones, and they weren't shut down. Security should have shut them down. ISU should have shut them down right away. ISU should have allowed for amplification devices or done everything in their power to create more sound, so that way the crowd wasn't all huddled up right there next to the tent. That's dangerous for everybody, not only Charlie Kirk, and it's harder for his security detail to keep him protected, but it's also bad because he's in a kill box, okay? He's surrounded by all these tall buildings, and then you've got, all these kids huddled around Charlie Kirk. I mean, it was just bad security. So President Donald Trump, it brings me to this story. He went out to eat in Washington, D.C., and he wanted to demonstrate that the city is safer after his crackdown on crime. We know he federalized the city. He cracked down on crime. He actually went to Joe's Seafood Prime Steak and Stone Crab. This is actually near the White House, and he certainly has made the streets safer for people in Washington, D.C., and he was cheered when he arrived, mostly. Take a listen to this. Here's Donald Trump arriving at this restaurant, and he was taking questions from reporters. He's at the seafood restaurant in Washington, D.C. Take a look.
Well, the president just leaving, short gaggle with reporters, and he decided, look, I'm going to see for myself. Washington, D.C., hitting the streets. Well, the president.
Okay, there's some footage of him going inside the restaurant. Laura Ingraham, she was there, and she said he took some questions from a gaggle of reporters, a small gaggle. While Trump was at the restaurant, there was a concerning moment that raises questions about Secret Service. Okay, conservatives, and I understand that what took Charlie's life and what attempted President Donald Trump's life was, just pure evil. Okay, evil forces. Our battle is not with flesh and blood, but the principalities of this world, the evil forces of this world. I understand that, and I'm not placing sole blame on security. Okay, but there were definitely some big question marks as far as Secret Service goes when Trump was almost assassinated, not once but twice, and then the assassination of Kirk. We as conservatives cannot be sleeping on security, and we cannot, dismiss security and precautions. Trump was being ushered to his seat at this restaurant with Vice President J.D. Vance and members of his cabinet. And right there in the restaurant, you've got members of Code Pink. This is a leftist, borderline terrorist. In fact, I might even just say domestic terrorist group. And they were chanting that Trump was the Hitler of our time. Now, Trump, in Trump fashion, he, of course, laughed them off. He laughed in their faces, and the protesters were promptly ushered out. But watch this. This is fascinating because it speaks to the security and the pitfalls, really, of the Secret Service. And I think that we need to have conversations as conservatives, as Christians. Hey, how do we protect ourselves? We can pray and trust God, yes. But we have to go and prepare. I've got scripture here in just a second that, tells us that yes, prayer, and yes, trusting in God. Charlie trusted God. That's why he wasn't afraid to go on to these campuses. He knew God's calling and purpose for his life. That's why he went on to these campuses. But we can't dismiss that we need tighter security for Christian conservative leaders, particularly, and even yourself. I say, wear your head on a swivel. Okay, don't be looking at your phone. Keep your eyes up when you're out in public. Watch this Code Pink, and Trump is laughing in their faces, but this speaks to a much larger issue, which is the Secret Service security and how effective it is. Take a look.
Free Palestine! Trump is the Hitler of our time! Free DC! Free Palestine! Trump is the Hitler of our time! Free DC! Free Palestine! Trump is the Hitler of our time! Free DC! Free Palestine! Trump is the Hitler of our time! What do you want your legacy to be? Let's go. What do you want your legacy to be? Free Palestine! Trump is the Hitler! And he was welcomed here! He's here at the community! Let's go! Time to go!
Okay, So you saw that. And this raises a big question, a huge question. How are they able to get so close to President Donald Trump? This is Code Pink. If they haven't been already deemed a domestic terror organization, they should be. Who tipped them off that Donald Trump was going to be there at that restaurant? Because by all appearances, this was kind of a, there was a very small reporter gaggle there. This was not publicly announced that Trump would be at this restaurant. And the Secret Service should have secured that restaurant prior to Donald Trump's arrival. Did they not see them there prior to Donald Trump's arrival? Did they not sweep the location? At this point, every member of the Secret Service and Capitol Police should know the faces of Code Pink, the people in Code Pink. They've been involved in so many protests. They should be deemed domestic terror threats. The Secret Service also needs to determine who tipped these people off, who informed them that President Donald Trump would be there that day. Meanwhile, this is also prompted concern and defense of Trump from Bill Maher. Okay. And he has a show, and it's an HBO show called Real Time. I'm not a fan of Bill Maher. Okay. I don't like talking about Bill Maher. I pull some of his clips occasionally. This is very much riddled with language. So if you have small children who watch the program, this is your time to turn it down a little bit. There is going to be expletives used. Bill Maher is kind of known for that. Not a fan of him. He's kind of wishy-washy for me. But he kind of called this out and talked about Code Pink being there and said that the left needs to stop demonizing and calling Trump Hitler. Okay. So let's take a listen. Here we go. Bill Maher. And he talks about Code Pink and he reacts to this. Here we go.
This shit has to stop too. We went out to dinner. I wouldn't have done that. In Washington, D.C., okay, and people started to gather around him and they were chanting, "You're the Hitler of our time." Okay, first of all, assholes, he's not Hitler. Okay, an insult to everybody in the Holocaust to begin with. Second of all, calling somebody Hitler makes it a lot easier to justify things like assassination. Let's put a shitload of that away, shall we? This shit has to stop too. We went out to dinner. I wouldn't have.
Okay. Yeah, that's Democrats. They just need to stop it. Bill Maher is so right. They just need to stop it with the calling Trump Hitler. It's not doing anything good. And in fact, it's justifying not only the attempts on Donald Trump's life, but it's justifying assassinations and now the assassination of Charlie Kirk. So good for Maher, Bill, that he said this so bluntly. And, most Americans, they are not radicals. They are not crazy radicals. And Maher, he called out anyone who mocked Charlie Kirk's death. And now there are people getting fired, rightfully so. How does it feel? I had people, try to call my employer and say things like, I actually had fun story. I actually had somebody call my employer one time because I had a Trump lanyard. Okay. This is a lanyard that I had. It was on my desk, and somebody had come down to an office location where I was at and had noticed that I had my lanyard sitting on my desk, and then promptly emailed the management, my bosses, that I had a Trump lanyard and that I should not have that on the grounds, okay, and that I shouldn't be, displaying that for people to see. And they tried to get me fired. Okay, so the left is very, very good at trying to get conservatives fired, especially over the vaccines. We remember this. I have a dear friend of mine who, was anti-mask, wasn't wearing a mask, didn't get a vaccine, and colleagues of hers emailed management to try to get her fired. And now conservatives are playing the game right back. We are trying to get people who are saying awful things about Charlie Kirk's death, celebrating it. Anybody who celebrates death like that is a demon. Okay, period. Or if there's demonic activity afoot. Okay, because anybody who celebrates death. Now, I there are some really bad people in the world, but you never celebrate death. Like even the assassin who might get the death penalty here, the assassin of Charlie Kirk who might get the death penalty, and will not celebrate his death. Okay. There are plenty of people. Joe Biden getting cancer. Conservatives all over did not celebrate Joe Biden getting cancer or the diagnosis. Okay. Conservatives don't do that. Christians don't do that. Death is terrible. Even if it's, a just death or a righteous death, it's terrible. And Maher, he called this out. People were mocking Charlie Kirk's death. He says that there is no use for you. And he pointed to how Kirk was killed under a tent that said, "Prove me wrong." This was a tent that said, "Prove me wrong." And what people want to do is just eliminate discussion altogether, talking altogether. Here's Bill Maher, some more comments where he just puts it bluntly that if you're celebrating Charlie Kirk's death, I have no use for you. Again, there are expletives here, or expletives. Take a listen.
Kind of a theme show because we write our editorial before the week starts, and so it was all about freedom of speech. Then the assassination occurred, so this is turning into a theme show. But it is kind of interesting that this guy was shot, and he's been on our show, been on my podcast. I talked to him. I like him. I like everybody. I talk to everybody. I think I'm glad I took that approach. But he was shot under a banner that said, "Prove me wrong," because he was a debater. And too many people think the way to do that, to prove you wrong, is to just eliminate you from talking altogether. So the people who mocked his death or justified it, I think you're gross. I have no use for you. The people who are saying now we're at war, I have no use for you. So my first question, true or false? I think the real war is not between left or right. It's for the people it's between the people on both sides who want a war and the people who don't.
I mean, I think that's accurate. I knew Charlie for 13 years, and when he was a kid, he was like an 18-year-old kid when I first met Charlie in the Breakers in Palm Beach, and he was fundraising, running around, and I watched him, grow into a man and watch him, get married and have a couple of very young kids. And, whatever you thought of Charlie's views is irrelevant. The fact is that what he made his living doing and what he actually did quite well, made himself really good at this, was just going and talking to people on the other side. And that's, what he was killed doing. He was literally in the middle of answering a question and picked up the microphone and was shot in the throat. And we do have a serious problem in this country with people who believe that violence is the proper response to speech. And that does skew young. I mean, what the polls tend to show is that of Gen Z, only 58% of Gen Z believes that there is no excuse for violence in response to speech, meaning that 42% believe that there are some times that violence ought to be a response to speech, which is deeply terrifying. I mean, on a personal level, obviously, I have 24/7 security. I've had 24/7 security for a decade. I've spoken at a lot of college campuses. I never, honest to God, thought that we were going to get to this point. Even the assassination of political figures is not the same thing as just being shot in the throat for the crime of debating issues in the public square. And I thought wrong. I thought that that's not what America is or what it should be about. And we've come to someplace incredibly dark in our nation's history. And, I weep for the country. I weep for Charlie. It's horrific.
Okay. So what you heard there was Ben Shapiro's response to Bill Maher. Ben Shapiro replied that it was horrific, that he was literally shot in the throat. I disagree with Bill Maher. I do think we are at war. It's not that I want war, and it's not the war he's really thinking of, I think. It's spiritual warfare. I am not interested in standing in solidarity with a godless ideology that kills people for simply speaking their mind and for debating people and engaging in discourse. I'm not interested in standing in solidarity with those people. We are in war. It's a spiritual warfare. And I will pray and pray until members of the Democrat Party or members of the left or whatever you want to call it, I don't even think it's left, right, Republican, much like Bill Maher said, these people want to destroy people physically. They want to kill people. And I will pray that this demonic activity exit their souls. Okay. And that the spiritual warfare, and I know the end of the book, right? We win. So I'll continue to pray for heaven to be on earth. This is what Ben said. He says, we've come to some place incredibly dark in our nation's history, and I weep for the country and I weep for Charlie. Unfortunately, some on the left, I call it that. I don't even know if it's left, right, Republican, Democrat anymore. Some people have been at war for decades now, a decade. And, it's become incredibly twisted. They started out with bake the cake for this godless ideology, right? This anti-family ideology, bake our cake. We're gay, bake our cake for us. Otherwise, we're going to cancel you. We're going to take you to court. So this has been going on, this spiritual warfare, this attack on biblical truth has been going on for years. Now it's taken a really dark, twisted turn where people are dying at the hands of these individuals who have been at this war and have been fighting for the principalities and for the evil forces. And if the left really truly wanted to bring down the temperature, and you'll hear a lot of the people in the ruling class or the elitists say, though, we got to bring down the temperature. We have to stand in solidarity with one another. If they truly wanted to do that, they would take the first step and call for people to stop chanting that Donald Trump is Hitler. Call for Code Pink to stand down. These members of the ruling class, and I think of Hakeem Jeffries or Chuck Schumer. I think of those individuals. If you really wanted the temperature to bring down, you would call for those people to stand down and to put their weapons down. And by their weapons, their rhetoric. It's for years I've convinced myself that people who call me fascist, KKK cat is one of their favorites, or racist, or sexist, or homophobic, transphobic. I've convinced myself that it was just noise and that it's just, people being silly. There's a real effect that kind of rhetoric has. And people in the ruling class, they have to bring down the temperature by telling those people to stand down and to calm it with their rhetoric. People like Governor J.B. Pritzker come out and say the Republicans should know no peace, or should know have no peace, or whatever it was that he said. I'm paraphrasing ish, not really. People of the ruling class need to actually bring down the temperature and not say things like that, and call for Code Pink and for these domestic terrorist organizations like BLM, Antifa, and call for them to stand down and to put their weapons down. So I want to switch gears here. We're going to talk about the Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg. He is in the polls, and I've told you that I think Pete Buttigieg is going to be the Democratic nominee, the Democrat presidential. He's a contender for 2028. I hope that's true, and all I've got to say to that is bring it on, Pete Buttigieg. But I'm going to take a quick break because Pete Buttigieg, he has a long list of failures that I've documented here on the Conservative Cat Show as Transportation Secretary. There was a total ludicrous rollout of EV chargers. The short version of that was that just a small handful were rolled out, were made operational despite billions being spent, billions of Biden dollars being spent. There was very little EV chargers that had actually gone online. Not to mention the derailment. I think there was a train derailment in Ohio. His response there was abysmal. There's so much, that Mayor Pete has done as far as failures go. But he's thinking about taking a stab at the presidency, and I think that he will be the nominee. I'm going to come out and say that now. I'll be right back. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss what's next. Hey, you're listening to the Conservative Cat Clips. This is the place where we don't call 911 first. Nope, we pray, we prepare, and yes, we pack heat. Every time there's a tragedy, the media and the Democrats, they start crying, do something, and do something. And what they mean is more laws, more bans, and more restrictions, not on criminals, mind you, but on law-abiding citizens. So let me tell you what evil doesn't care about. They don't care about legislation. The man willing to break the sixth commandment, thou shalt not murder, doesn't blink twice at your AR-15 ban. Okay, he doesn't read your gun-free zone signs. He sees those signs and he says, this is an invitation for me. Gun control doesn't stop evil. It disarms good people. The founding fathers didn't give us the Second Amendment so we could go hunting. They gave us the Second Amendment to protect ourselves against tyrants, both foreign and domestic. And newsflash, tyrants don't tend to announce themselves. They come wearing smiles and waving around fancy policies. And I also want to talk about self-defense today. Self-defense. The average police response time in big cities like Chicago could be up to 10 minutes, sometimes even longer. I know the Chicago PD is really struggling with that. Response times in rural areas, it could get up to even 30 minutes response time. So if somebody kicks down your door, are you going to ask them to wait until the government sends backup to protect you, or are you going to protect your family and take matters into your own hands? So grandma, okay, in Peoria, Illinois, she is just trying to defend her property, but yet she's the one treated like a criminal. She has to go through all kinds of crazy background checks, permits, training. And the thug in Chicago, he gets the gun out of his trunk in an alley, and he didn't think twice about our laws, okay? It's about power. It always has been. Every dictatorship in history has disarmed their citizens first. First, that's Stalin, that's Hitler, that's Mao. They didn't want competition. And once the guns were gone, so were the rights, the freedom, and the people. So a disarmed people is a controlled people. But an armed, faithful, and free people, that is a nightmare for tyrants. And really, it's a blessing to your neighbors if you are armed. The Second Amendment isn't outdated. It's eternal. And just like evil, just like our right, just like the evil has the right to do evil things, and that they will, we have the right to resist evil and to arm ourselves. And the Second Amendment is pretty dang clear, shall not be infringed. This has been Conservative Cat Clips. Smash that like button, share this out with your friends, and go ahead and subscribe to the channel while you're here. Here at the Conservative Cat Show, we have documented Mayor Pete's long list of failures. As transportation secretary, he had a stupid rollout of EV chargers that were supposed to be operational. The short version here, I'll give it to you. Just a small handful of those EV chargers wound up operational after billions of Biden dollars being spent. He went on paternity leave at a time of national crisis, not to mention his total abysmal job when it came to the derailment in Ohio, where people were quite literally losing the ability to speak because of the harsh chemicals that had been dumped out from these rail carts. Because of this derailment that happened, he had a terrible response to that. Actually, Donald Trump responded to that, and he wasn't even president at the time. So he had a better response than Mayor Pete Buttigieg, Department of Transportation Secretary. So this man is not and was not ever ready for prime time. He is not ready for prime time, was never ready for prime time. But however, I do think that they are going to push him out there as a Democrat nominee, and here's why. He's a useful idiot, but he's not. He presents himself well. Kamala Harris, Jasmine Crockett, AOC, they are a little bit too firebrand-ish. They want somebody that feels safe. Joe Biden, who came off as a moderate, they want somebody out there who you can kind of push out there as a moderate or try to sell as a moderate, although he's not at all a moderate. He's kind of like Joe Biden, where you can sell him as a moderate. Kamala Harris, tough sell as a moderate. AOC, not going to be a good sell as a moderate. They're not going to be able to sell her as a moderate. Pete Buttigieg, I think they'd be able to sell him as a moderate. He was appearing on NBC, Pete Buttigieg, Meet the Press, just yesterday, and apparently he found a pair because long after it mattered, by the way, because he was out there talking about how Joe Biden should have never ran for president. He was asked about former Vice President Kamala Harris's new book, in which she described the former president's decision to run for re-election as reckless. Okay, so Vice President Kamala Harris said that in her book about, Joe Biden's decision to run was completely reckless, and he was asked about this, and he commented on it. Let's take a listen here to NBC's Meet the Press and Pete Buttigieg's response, which is a little too late. You didn't say anything when it mattered. You weren't brave enough to say anything when it mattered. But now you're saying it on Meet the Press. Let's take a look.
I have to ask you about this new book, Vice President Kamala Harris. We are starting to see some excerpts. She writes about President Biden's decision to run for re-election, and she says this, quote, "It's Joe and Jill's decision. We all said that like a mantra, as if we'd all been hypnotized. Was it grace or was it recklessness? In retrospect, I think it was recklessness." You were in the president's cabinet, of course. Do you believe it was recklessness for President Biden's inner circle not to intervene sooner?
He should not have run. And if he had made that decision sooner, we might have been better off. But it literally was his decision. Nobody else was able to make that decision. And now in front of us, we're confronted with the decisions that come next, whether that's inside of a political party or movement, or as we're all weighing right now, in our own lives as Americans, as a country. And that's where we've got to focus.
I have to ask you about this new book.
Okay, there's Pete Buttigieg. He says he should not have run. You're a little too late there, Pete Buttigieg. It doesn't matter that you say that now. It doesn't matter that Kamala Harris says that now. You guys should have came out and said that it's reckless for President Joe Biden to run when he announced his re-election campaign, okay? And if he had made the decision sooner, we might have been better off, but it literally was his decision. Nobody was able to make that decision, and now in front of us, we're confronted with the decisions that come next, whether that's inside the political party or movement, or as we're all weighing right now in our own lives as Americans, as a country. And that's where we've got to focus. So I definitely think that they're going to try to push this guy out as a contender, as a 2028 presidential contender. I think that they could pitch him as a moderate, whereas like an AOC or Jasmine Crockett, you can't really pitch them as moderates. And JB has way too much ambition. We know that Mayor Pete has no ambitions, clearly by his cabinet role. He couldn't even, finish an initiative of rolling out EV chargers for people. But despite having billions of dollars to do so, by the way. So I think that they're going to push him out. It's easier to present him as a moderate. That's why they ran Joe Biden. They thought that they pitch him as a moderate and sell him as a moderate to the American people. President Donald Trump has called Federal Reserve Board Chairman Jerome Powell, Too Late Jerome. That is usually the nickname that Trump gives him, because he's refused to lower interest rates and steadfastly refused to lower those interest rates. And I think that this nickname that Trump has given Jerome Powell could be applied to Mayor Pete here. He's too late, Pete. Sorry, too late, Pete. Where was your bravery when the country was at the brink, Pete? Okay, where was your bravery when Joe Biden actually announced that he was running for re-election? Where were your cojones? Because you're too late now. Did you, speak out, sound the alarm on the fact that we were very, very close to voting in a mentally out of touch president, a president who we now know probably had terminal illnesses, for a second, sure to be disastrous second term. Where were you? Why weren't you sounding the alarm back then? Now you're sounding the alarm when it really doesn't matter. No, you were silent back then. Big words. Now, though, he says, quote, "I was not included in the process of deciding whether the president should run again. He made that decision, and I think I'm not alone in believing that he should have made the decision not to run sooner." You're too late, Pete. You should have came out in media during NBC Meet the Press and said that you didn't believe that Joe Biden should run for re-election despite you being a cabinet member. If you had cojones, you would have done it. I was not included in the process of deciding whether the president should run again. I love that. Completely wash your hands of it, Pete. Say that you weren't involved in the process, despite you being a cabinet member Okay, the transportation secretary, and you are constantly on left-wing news, on these news shows, and your fawning hosts, your hosts were drooling over you and your work as transportation secretary, and they were fawning over everything the Biden-Harris administration did. You had your chance to tell the truth. You had plenty of chances to tell the truth, and it's a whole lot easier now because there are no consequences for doing so, for telling the truth. You are too late. You're too late, Pete. And please run Pete Buttigieg, because I'm quite sure that J.D. Vance, Ron DeSantis, whoever the GOP Republican candidate will be in 2028, I'm sure that they are rooting hard for you to enter this race because they and I and all of us, we are going to remind Americans every single day that you were MIA, missing in action, when the nation stood in the balance. Where were you when we were this close to electing a guy that was mentally incapable of being president, physically incapable of being president, probably terminally ill? We were this close to electing him to a second term. And I just simply put, you are just too late. And these types of men, and I use that term loosely when referring to Pete Buttigieg, these types of men only tell the truth when the consequences aren't there. Unlike Charlie Kirk, Charlie Kirk told the truth when there was extreme consequence, when he knew that his life was at risk and he was willing to do it anyway. Pete Buttigieg wouldn't even, his life wouldn't have been at risk had he just come out and said that I don't think that Joe Biden should run for a second term. There was, maybe like a political, maybe your political career would have died, but it would have been the right thing to do. It would have been the truth that you didn't think that Joe Biden was mentally capable to run for president again. Why didn't you tell the truth then? Oh, because you aren't a real man like Charlie Kirk, and you don't tell the truth when it's hard. You only tell the truth when there are no consequences for doing so. All right, I got to take a quick break, but smash that like button, share this out with your friend. What do you think? Do you think Pete Buttigieg is going to run for president? Oh, I hope my video is not frozen anymore. Let me know in the comments section if you are getting our videos, if you are getting the notifications, if you're subscribed. Be sure to subscribe if you aren't already. I'm going to come back, and we are going to be talking about a bill that was signed by Governor J.B. Pritzker. And you won't want to miss that up next on Conservative Cat. Hey, go ahead and smash that like button. Let me know what your attendance was like at your church yesterday. My attendance was crazy. We had some new folks. People are turning to God. I think that revival is coming. I've had so many of my friends reach out to me asking me about their next steps in their faith journey, which is so exciting. That is such a Christian dream. I don't know about you, but you as a fellow Christian, and we talked about this earlier, where the Conservative Cat Show, I really designed it to where this could be a place for Christians. And I'm talking about Christians, level 1, level 2 Christians. And, we take your faith to the next level where we connect faith with politics, current events, news stories, and we try to make sense of politics here, specifically in the state of Illinois, which I'm going to do with this next story about this bill being signed by JB. But Charlie was so good in getting you from level 0 to level 1. And I'm going to be honest with you, I struggle with that. And I think that we all need to get back in church. People have texted me that, like, I went to church for the first time in 10 years, yesterday, Kat. And, people are turning to God in this moment. I think that we have to get ready as Christians. Those of us who have been playing at level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5 have been saved for quite a while, attend church, and are living in the faith and are following Jesus and have proclaimed Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord of our lives. We need to get ready. And we need to be like Charlie Kirk in a sense where he was so good at getting people, like, going into these college campuses. He was pulling people from 0 to 1, level 1, getting them to see and hear the gospel, and to get them to convert, I think. And he was really good at doing that. And I'm not. And I'm going to try over the next couple of months to really get good at getting people to just hear about Jesus. So pray for me as I learn more and try to get good at getting people to come to Christ, just that initial step of coming to Christ. And you have to get good at that, my friend, because there is a revival coming and more people are going to be asking you, hey, where do I go from here in my faith journey? So I want to bring this story up today. Today we are diving into Illinois politics like we usually do, where common sense goes to die, by the way. Illinois politics and big government grows like weeds in your grandma's garden. Governor J.B. Pritzker, yes, the same governor that treats your tax dollars like monopoly money, has signed yet another safety bill. Safety for our schools bill. This is House Bill 1316. A lot of Republicans, actually, I think this was voted on unanimously in both houses, I'm pretty sure, but a lot of Republicans voted for this. And I know what you're going to think. Kat, this is so harmless. Like, why are you making such a fuss about this? These bills always sound harmless, but they're really gay, to put it bluntly, some of these bills. And I mean that, in the 2012 sense of the word, stupid. This one requires teachers to report firearm threats to principals. Okay, so the state has mandated that every district implement this rule where teachers are required to report firearm threats or safety threats or some sort of threat to the principal. Okay, sounds good. Sounds fine. Whatever, Kat. Maybe at first glance, but let me tell you something. This is going to wind up being another layer of bureaucracy, and I think that this is where this bill is headed. And if, our legislators would think critically, they wouldn't vote for these things because they'd be able to, say, hey, a couple steps from this bill, this is just the start of it. This is just the start of this layer of bureaucracy, okay, that they want. Because what's next? They're going to probably say, well, we need a call center, to field the threats from these teachers who are reporting it to the principal, because the principal is very busy. And what we're going to have to do is set up a call center, and they'll have to perform threat assessments and all the threats that come in from our teachers to the principal's office. Okay. So this is going to be another layer of bureaucracy. I'm calling it now. It's going to be some sort of division of threat assessment in all of our school districts. And there's going to be a threat assessment director or supervisor or superintendent, right? And we're going to pay another $100,000 for that person's salary and pension. This is another committee report that will do absolutely nothing to determine a killer or to stop a determined killer and to determine if that threat is credible. Okay, I don't think that this is going to do very much of anything. Okay, and in the meantime, what you've got is that actual threat. While our schools are being more bureaucratic and coming up with these bureaucratic solutions, we've got teachers who aren't actually teaching. They're teaching woke nonsense, and then our kids aren't safer. And then you've got the threat actually making moves to act on that threat. Okay, so what does the bill actually say? It requires teachers, if they hear of a firearm or a threat, or a student saying they have a firearm at school to report it to the principal. Okay. Notice it says not to report it to law enforcement. Okay. Me as a teacher, if I were to hear that, automatically, I think I would call a law enforcement officer, and then I would call, my higher ups, the administrators, and make them known. But my first gut reaction would probably be to call law enforcement, call 911. They're the trained professionals that, the administrators are not, the principals are not. If I believe that there is a threat, or if a student is talking about a firearm or having a knife, most likely I'm going to go to law enforcement. Okay, if I deem it a credible threat. And what we're doing here is we're kind of getting teachers to not think of themselves as like threat assessors. You are a person, you are an adult. You should be able to have the critical thinking skills, surely if you're hired, to be able to assess, hey, is this threat? What should I do with it? Right? And take personal responsibility. That's what this bill does. Ultimately, it takes the personal responsibility away from the teacher, and it just requires that teacher to be a cog in this bureaucracy. Okay. So in Center Square, State Representative Dennis Tipsword, he's a lawmaker and a law enforcement officer. He says, well, this is just common sense, which it kind of is. I'd imagine that not all threats, like maybe, little Timmy had whispered to his friend that, hey, check out this pocket knife, dude, and, maybe it's not really a credible threat. A teacher overhears that. Okay, I'm not going to call the police, right? I mean, as a teacher, I would probably grab little Timmy or require little Timmy, or go to the principal and require little Timmy to go to the principal's office, or grab him and bring him down myself, whatever the case may be. You take that situation, you discern it, you use your sense of discernment, then you act from there. When you do a blanket requirement, like requiring teachers to automatically go to the principal, no matter what the threat is, and you kind of take it away from the teacher's discernment here, you're creating bureaucracy and kind of like a you aren't responsible for what goes on in the hallways environment. Okay. And you're taking away personal responsibility from these teachers in this sense of personal responsibility and accountability in these situations. So I'm not buying it, like this whole like, oh, this is just common sense. Well, yeah, it's common sense, but like the teachers, shouldn't blanket have to report this to the principal. If they wanted to run out the school, if they thought that, hey, this is such a threat, I'm going to grab 10 of my students or my classroom of students and I'm going to evacuate the building. They should be able to do that, whatever they discern as credible, or what they think the threat is, or I'm going to call law enforcement. They should be able to act based on their own discernment. So originally, law enforcement was supposed to be in the loop here in this bill. There was a House amendment that took them out of the bill. In very Springfield fashion, they said, oh, well, the police might be getting too many calls. So the bill was originally going to say, like, hey, you should call law enforcement if you see a threat, a firearm threat, or if there is a threat at your school, you should call law enforcement. So they took that part out, and then they, just had it blanket, like, call the principal. And then from there, the principal is going to decide whether to call law enforcement. So Springfield fashion, they said, oh, the cops, they're going to get too many calls. Okay. And we can't have that. We can't have the cops getting too many calls. So, let's take the cops out of there. Let's make it to where the teachers contact the principal only. Okay. And let's encourage the teachers to only contact the principals. And that's kind of like saying, well, let's build a fire alarm system and let's not hook it up to the fire department when the fire department come out because they're just too busy. Okay. So friends, this doesn't really sound like safety to me. Does it sound like safety to you? Or does it sound like, cover your tail politics and like, we want to build bureaucracy politics? That's really what this sounds like to me. I'd imagine a year or two from now, they're going to probably build the Department of Threat Assessment in all of our area high schools. and they're going to staff it, and there's going to be a director of threat assessment at the tippity top who gets paid all kinds of taxpayer dollars for their salary. Here's the truth. When you put principals in charge of handling gun threats instead of law enforcement, what happens? You create this notification only culture. Okay, and this lack of discernment and this lack of personal responsibility. Teachers, they have to report up the chain here, and then it becomes a paper trail. So principals aren't police. Okay, let's be very clear. They're not trained interrogators. So what? You reported to the principal this threat. They call little Timmy down to the office for having a pocket knife, and then they discern, whether that's a true threat or not. I'm sorry, but you're not equipped to stop a violent attack, principals. That's not really your domain. You're kind of trained in memos, meetings, emails, and you're not really trained, I would say, in threat assessment. And that's what we're asking our principals to do, is to be the threat assessors and to determine if that should be passed up to law enforcement or not. And, I would imagine that the way this will kind of play out is the teacher reports little Timmy for the pocket knife. The principal deems it as not a credible threat because Timmy is a transgender and is just going through something. And then it's filed, and then there's paperwork, and there's emails sent, and that's all that happens. And then a couple of weeks later, Timmy doesn't bring a pocket knife to school, but he brings a gun and shoots all of his classmates. That's how I think that this is going to play out. What should have happened was the teacher should have taken the personal responsibility, used her discernment, and said, hey, little Timmy brought a pocket knife. I think that this is a pretty credible threat. Timmy is a little strange, socially awkward. I'm going to take this to the police. I'm going to go all the way to law enforcement. And I'm not going to worry about going up the chain and going to I'll go to the police first, and then I'll talk to my principal about it and tell them that I made a report with the police, and to have little Timmy checked out. And to have the police go interrogate little Timmy to determine if he's a threat. So that's how it should play out. Now, if little Timmy is just kind of being like a silly kid and, sharing this pocket knife with his friend, and you don't think that it's really a credible threat, then you just kind of go to the police or go to the principal, and then the principal's like, yeah, I don't think it's all that credible. Then that should be determined from there. Okay? But you shouldn't advocate for teachers to go to the principal automatically, and that they go through this chain, and that they don't use their personal discernment. So let's get real here. Teachers are under pressure to keep the numbers down, right? I would imagine what winds up happening here, no school wants to be known as the school with the most threats, okay? So what are many principals probably going to do? They're going to downplay little Timmy bringing a pocket knife to school. They're going to bury it. They're going to delay. They're going to not report it because that's human nature under bureaucratic systems. They don't want the threats that come into their offices to be high. They want them to be low. They want it to be low, and they want to look good. Okay, so what happens when we just do paperwork in times of a crisis? It gets filed in a cabinet, and evil walks right through the front doors. And that's what this is really advocating for, is paperwork. We need doers. We need teachers who say, hey, no, I'm going to file a police report on little Timmy, and now I will go to my principal and say, hey, here's the police report I filed on 20. He brought a knife to school, right? Representative Dennis Tipsford and all the Republicans, I mean, this was unanimous. They did say, one thing, and Republicans have advocated for this for a long time, that Illinois needs to get realistic. We need to do realistic active shooter drills. We should have kept those. There was horrible legislation that removed those realistic shooter drills, active shooter drills, from being performed in our schools, said that you can't do them anymore. And he's right. I mean, we've told teachers that, hey, don't worry, just sit quietly and imagine what a gunshot would sound like. And once you hear that gunshot, act from there. Folks, evil is real. pretending it doesn't exist isn't going to keep our children safe in these schools, these no-gun zones. We need active shooter drills that are realistic. We need the sounds of guns. We need kids learning how to tie tourniquets. We need real trauma response active shooter drills to be performed in these schools. If you don't prepare kids for reality, you're just going to leave them vulnerable. Do you think the Israelites just imagined their enemy's web? Earlier in the show, we talked about security. You know, Donald Trump's Secret Service, they should have swept that restaurant and got rid of Code Pink before he even got in there. Charlie Kirk, ISU's campus, there were plenty of security holes at ISU's campus 5 months ago. I'm sure there were plenty of security flaws at the Utah University where he was ultimately assassinated. But the Israelites didn't just imagine away their enemies. Okay, we didn't notify our principals of our enemies. You know, the Israelites didn't. They built walls. They trained their young men. Okay, they trusted God, but they also prepared. And we need to do the same thing today, not only in our schools, but at our universities and our campuses. Our Secret Service needs to prepare for the worst. And I'm sorry, but this bill doesn't strike me as preparing for the worst. It kind of strikes me as a, just imagine or, report a notification only type system or type of solution. Okay. The Bible says in Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 9, but we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. Notice it wasn't just prayer. Okay. Instead of preparation. And it wasn't preparation and no prayer. It was prayer and preparation. Okay, our schools should take note of this verse, Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 9. But we prayed to God and we posted a guard and day and night to meet this threat. So simultaneously getting rid of the active shooter drills, the realistic active shooter drills where we're teaching children how to tie tourniquets and where real gunshots or like real gunshot noises are fired and a realistic drill is performed. While we're getting rid of that, we're replacing that kind of stuff with, just notify the principal. Take note of it. Call the principal and have the principal do the threat assessment. There's this chain of bureaucracy happening, and that's not how we prepare. Okay. The state of Illinois, again, they are taking away the personal responsibility out of this and how school districts at a local level handle safety. Okay, safety decisions should be local. What this does, it is a blanket, a broad brush, like all teachers should notify the principals when they think there is a threat. That's broad brush. You know, not every school district is the same. Perhaps the principal is not comfortable with fielding threat assessments. Perhaps the principal would prefer you take it to local law enforcement instead of he or she. So every school should get a say, really, in how they handle safety. Perhaps the principal is off campus a lot of the time and can't deal with threat assessments readily. So a small town high school in central Illinois is not the same as an inner city in Chicago. Okay. But Springfield loves these one-size-fit-all bills. Blanket brush, broad brush statement saying, teachers should notify principals if they think there's a threat. Yes, but and perhaps they should, stop the threat right there. If I'm a teacher and I see a child, taking out a gun, loading a gun and, pulling back the gun slide and loading up the gun, and I'm not going to go and report to the principal then. Okay, I'm going to do my own threat assessment. If I think that child is going to wind up shooting somebody, and I'm going to slam the kid in the locker and try to take the gun out of his hand. Perhaps that is what my next step should be. When you broad blanket this, you're causing teachers to kind of like second guess their own personal responsibility and like their own threat assessment that they're capable to do as an individual, and you're trying to get them to act as a cog rather than somebody who's capable of stopping a threat and dealing with that threat accordingly. So what's the result? We've got local parents and teachers who lose their voice, lose their sense of discernment, and the people who know their kids the best, these teachers who know their kids the best, they're silenced, and it gets all caught up in a system, okay, designed by bureaucrats who wouldn't last 5 minutes in a classroom. The principal isn't interacting with these kids on a daily basis. The principal might not deem little Timmy with the pocket knife as a threat because the principal doesn't see how little Timmy terrorizes the students on a day-to-day basis in the hallways. So I just don't like this bill. I think that it's one of those feel-good bills that really doesn't do much. It doesn't do any like real harm, I would say, but it doesn't do anything good for sure. I think that it does. It doesn't do much at all. If not, it might cause harm in that you are taking away the discernment of teachers and their ability to perform their own threat assessment and to decide what to do with that threat, and where to go with that threat. Rather, they are kind of locked into one direction, which is to report that threat to the principal, rather than, take personal responsibility and accountability over that threat. This is the Conservative Cat Show. Our mission is crystal clear. We are liberty-centered, family-first, truth-based commentary. Because if parents and communities aren't at the center of school safety, okay, parents, teachers, public school teachers, if they aren't at the center of school safety, then safety isn't the real goal. Okay, control is. They should be at the center, the people closest to the kids. The principals, let's face it, are not the closest to the kids. And I don't trust the principal to conduct the threat assessment accurately. I would trust the teacher over the principal to conduct the threat assessment more accurately, in that teacher gets to see that student more regularly and would be better apt to perform that assessment. So let's face it, no law passed in Springfield is going to stop a determined killer. Evil does not think about the laws or respect laws, okay? The Columbine shooter killers, they broke about 20 plus laws. The Uvalde killer broke multiple laws. Criminals don't care about regulations. They're not going to care about 1316. Okay, what will 1316, this House bill that requires teachers to report to the principal when they see a threat, what is it going to accomplish, really? At the end of the day, I say more paperwork. The principals are going to be tied up in threat assessment meetings. More teachers are going to be scared to act the way they discern. And they're going to wonder, am I properly following the chain? Am I following the reporting chain correctly? They're going to be more concerned about, hey, should I contact my principal first? I mean, this kid's got a gun and he's racking it back. Should I contact the principal? Should I go to the principal first, or should I do something and get the gun out of his hand? You're taking that personal discernment away from these teachers with this bill. And when the bullets fly, let's be real, that chain of command collapses. That's the reality here, folks. Nobody really gives a damn about the chain of command when a threat is right before your eyes. Nobody really gives a damn about the chain of command. That teacher is going to do whatever he or she thinks she needs to do in order to either eliminate that threat or get the people who correctly can address that threat to address that threat. You know what would work? And this is what I'm going to say about school shootings. And there was one recently, actually, the day after the same day Charlie Kirk was assassinated, the Desmond Holly fella, who's seen pictured with members of his family and on his believed to be father's Facebook page, where he was carrying a sign that said, I'd throw eggs at Donald Trump if they weren't so expensive. So definitely radicalized. That was actually, the FBI told us he was radicalized. Anyway, Desmond Holly, he shot up all of his friends. A kid died, by the way. So sad. You know what would work? Empowering law enforcement. Telling teachers, hey, if you feel like this threat is worthy of law enforcement, call whoever you want. Call your husband, call your wife, call whoever you need. Call the first person you know with a gun who is in the closest in the area who can eliminate this threat or stop this threat. Call whoever you can to get this threat stopped. Okay, empower law enforcement. We need to train our staff to have their own discernment and have their own threat assessment capabilities. And we need to really allow teachers to carry. We need to allow willing teachers, teachers who want to carry. We need to restore moral teaching, above all, in schools. Teaching young men responsibility, discipline, reverence for life. But Pritzker's law doesn't do any of this. House Bill 1316 doesn't do any of this. And really, I mean, we could go a step back and we could say, why do these tragedies keep happening in these schools? Well, it's because God has been pushed out of the classroom. Society has pushed God out of the classroom. The 10 Commandments used to be on the walls in our classrooms. Fun fact, school shootings probably definitely were way, way down when the 10 Commandments were posted on the walls in our classrooms. Thou shalt not kill. That was the standard. And now instead of hanging up the 10 Commandments, we're hanging up posters that read restorative justice, conflict mediation. And when violence erupts, instead of turning to God, the state says, well, let's form a task force. Let's write up another memo. Right? So, friends, bureaucracy can't heal a heart. Only Christ can heal. And unless we teach our kids the value of life, that they are made in the image of God, then no bill in Springfield is going to keep them safe. We need to start teaching children the value of life. We need to allow willing teachers to arm themselves if they feel like they need to arm themselves in these schools. And, I can't help but picture this whole process as like a bad sitcom. Okay, this House Bill 1316. Teacher hears a kid muttering something about bringing a gun. She runs to the principal, and the principal says, well, let me fill out our 4B form. And fills out the 4B form, and he says, well, let me make 3 copies. I'm going to give a copy to the kids' parents. I'm going to give a copy to, this administrator and his teacher here, and we're going to fill out this form together. Meanwhile, while all of that bureaucracy is going on and all the form filling out is happening, you've got the kid live streaming his manifesto. But hey, don't worry, the paperwork is filed and the threat assessment has been conducted by the principal and the administrators. And as long as that's done, Springfield is satisfied. Like, this is how I'd imagine this whole process would kind of play out. So this isn't about safety, it's safety theater. It's kind of like the TSA at the airport. They require you to take off your shoes, they confiscate your toothpaste, they dump your water bottle out. But don't worry, we might have missed the guy who brought the knife in his backpack, but hey, at least we're, participating in this safety theater. Bottom line, 1316 is just another feel-good law that adds bureaucracy, creates paperwork, not protection, and it shows once again that Springfield is more concerned with appearances rather than results. If they were really concerned with results, we'd do realistic active shooter drills, we'd arm our teachers, we'd be teaching children about the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill, we'd put prayer back in schools. If they were really concerned about results, they'd be doing all of that. We want safe schools, we want parents involved, we want local control respected, faith restored, and responsibility taught. Not another bill, not more bureaucracy. To my listeners, let me remind you, our mission here is truth, liberty, family, and Christ at the center. Don't let politicians sell you the illusion of safety while stripping you of your control. Okay, smash that like button, share this out with your friends, subscribe to the channel. I am on Rumble, YouTube, Facebook. As always, I am praying for you. And this week has been really hard. If you just need an ear, right? Or if you need to chat with somebody, conservativecatbarker@gmail.com. I'm here for you. And I do think conservatives need to have serious conversations about security, not only in our schools and what is effective and what will work as far as threat assessments and how to deal with those threats, I think we need to have serious conversations about that in our schools, but we also need to have serious conversations at our universities. The Secret Service has to have serious conversations, because what happened to President Donald Trump at that restaurant should not have happened, where Code Pink was within feet of President Donald Trump shouting Hitler in his face. Okay. So there needs to be security. We need to pray and prepare. Okay. The Israelites, they built walls. They were preparing for the enemy. So yes, pray, but also prepare. All right. God bless you. I'll be back tomorrow morning bright and early. I'll catch you later.